Hi everyone. Welcome back to another workshop conducted by Club Meg Volunteering. I am today's presenter. My name is Maha and I go by any pronouns. In my last workshop, I discussed Klinefelter syndrome, where it is a chromosomal disorder that affects men and shows a deviation from the binary sex code that a lot of people have seemed to establish, where we distinguish ourselves on the basis of either being male or female, and Klinefelter syndrome sort of contests that in such a way that sex determines your chromosomes determine your sex, and Klinefelter syndrome says otherwise because your chromosome composition is different. However, this only affects males having ambiguities, or at least that's what the scientific community refers it to as. Today, I'll be discussing Turner syndrome, which tends to affect a lot of females. Please mind that the language I use is not to promote the binary code of sex and gender, rather, I am using it for easier communication. And viewer discretion is advised if anyone isn't comfortable with the topic. I truly understand that, but I will get started on it. So, I am going to start from the very first slide, and I'm going to talk about the Turner syndrome. Um, Introduction. So, Turner syndrome is a condition that only affects females, results in when one of the X chromosomes is missing or is partially missing. Turner syndrome can cause a variety of medical and developmental problems, including short height, failure of the ovaries to develop, and heart defects. Turner syndrome may be diagnosed before birth, prenatally through the amniotic fluids, really. During infancy or early childhood, even ultrasound can help you detect the chromosomal composition of the child, of the fetus in your womb. So, but the diagnosis of the syndrome, see, in the amniotic fluid and in the composition of the fetus, they can only diagnose you on the basis of your karyotype or your chromosome number composition. But the diagnosis of Turner syndrome, because it's a syndrome signifies prominent collection of symptoms that occur all together to signify that, yeah, a syndrome has occurred. It's not only the chromosome composition that matters, it's the way it affects the phenotype of the body, your physical characteristics of the body that are classified as symptoms, which really matter in determining whether or not you have Turner syndrome. So prenatally, when you have a fetus, you can only determine their chromosome number, but you cannot classify it as a Turner syndrome. You can only accurately diagnose it once you're an adult and once you're a teenager, but you can um, like showcase the possibility of having it when you're a child or when you're a fetus. So you women with Turner syndrome require a variety of specialists. In my last workshop, I talked about how men with Klinefelter syndrome at the top most require an endocrinologist because this syndrome abruptly affects your hormone levels. So your abnormal levels also indicate the existence of a particular syndrome. In this case, we're going to be talking about Turner syndrome. So regular checkups, talking to specialists, it's very important to lead a healthy and independent life. Now I'm just gonna this is better. If you look at the image, it is not necessary that all of these symptoms occur all together for you to be classified under the Turner syndrome. It's more of the fact that a prominent amount of these symptoms need to be presented in order for you to have the syndrome and in order for you to be diagnosed. So signs and symptoms may vary among girls and women with the same disorder. It's not readily apparent. A number of physical features in growth are apparent early on, usually at the start of puberty. Signs may be subtle, but they will become more apparent over time. So before birth, DNA screening is done again through amniotic fluid. Prenatal ultrasound of baby with Turner syndrome may show large liquid fluid collection from on the back of the neck, heart abnormalities, and abnormal kidneys. At birth or during infancy, you can read through all of this. For now, but I'm just going to mention some of the prominent ones which I feel are important. Um, we'll talk about the web-like neck. Web-like neck basically means a deformed neck that occurs due to the pressure caused by the fluid at the back of the neck. So as a fetus, you have an disproportionate distribution of the amniotic fluid in the womb. The large part of it collects at the back of the fetus's head and causes things like scoliosis to children. Like it further develops into scoliosis, of course, that people are not may not be born with scoliosis, right? So a really large part of Turner syndrome affects your back formation, which is your spine, your back, your head, your neck, most probably. Um, Now talking about a cleft palate. Women with Turner syndrome can have a cleft palate. So cleft palate and cleft lip is like, okay, so cleft lip is when you have a deformed lip such that you there is no differentiation between your nose and your lip. And cleft palate is when the roof of your mouth is uh, is not separating your nose from your mouth. There are breathing problems. There are prominent problems in your mouth where it's difficult to eat, it's difficult to breathe, and it's just affecting your whole mouth. So it's like opening in the roof of your mouth, in the roof of your mouth. I'm not going to talk deeper into this, but usually there are a lot, there are surprisingly common number of people with cleft lip and cleft palate. Cleft lip and cleft palate doesn't necessarily affect females only, right? So, but once they're diagnosed with a cleft lip and a cleft palate, it's important to check for the chromosome composition that might cause it. We're going to talk about swelling in hands and feet. Swelling of hands and feet. It's not that apparent. Be- I'll say this because children are born chubby. They are supposed to have a good composition of fat in their bodies before their joints are formed. It's not a prominent symptom, but there are some sort of abnormalities that are attached to it. I'd say slow growth. Slow growth would be development of motor skills, your language skills, all of that. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Motor skills and language skills come at toddler. We're talking about infancy and birth, so I cannot talk about that. Cardiac defects is your aorta and your heart being affected because of the DNA composition in your heart. It's not accurate. It's either all of them have an XO chromosome or all of them just like some of them have the XO chromosome, some of them don't. O signifies that there is no chromosome next to the X. Um, I will explain further into what the cause is, how it actually works. I'm just gonna talk about symptoms for now. In teenagers, the reason why it's more prominent is because different girls, like different teenagers, hit puberty at different ages. Like there is no specific age for puberty. There is a range of age for puberty, but you cannot specifically decide when a girl should get a puberty because different women go through different periods of life. You cannot really say that. Moving on from that, you have short stature, ovarian insufficiency due to ovarian failure that might have occurred by birth or gradually during childhood. Ovarian failure would basically be the job of your ovaries to review is to release ovules every month so that uh, in the anticipation of a sperm coming and fertilizing it. But if that does not happen, then you go through menstruation in order to get rid of that egg and to get rid of your endometrium or your uterus in order for it to be replaced by another thick one with another ovule. But when ovarian failure occurs, release of ovule is not guaranteed. So some of the signs and symptoms again include no growth spurts, adult height significantly less than might expect a female member of the family. Let's come to this. Being 5'2", 5'1", 5'4" does not make you have Turner syndrome. I'm 5'2". That does not mean that I have Turner syndrome. What it means is that your height depends on the female members on both of your mom and dad's family. For example, my mom's 5'7", my dad's 5'10", or 5'8". I'm not quite sure, but they both are taller than me, which doesn't necessarily mean I might be suffering through a syndrome, which is the reason why I can't. It's genetics, right? Genetics is not a role. Is that is like is played at like plays a significant role. So the actual reason why my height is short is because the female members of my dad's side of the family are actually short. It's the reason why it's genetics. Right? We're talking about chromosomal disorders. Chromosomal disorders can be another chromosomal disorders. Let's keep in mind they are not necessarily genetic. They're not genetic because I'll explain. I'll get into that later. So sexual development stalls during teenage years. I'm not going to read through all of them. I'm going to read through the ones which I feel are important. The rest of them are feel free to read them on your own. Inability to conceive a child without fertility treatment. We say most women with Turner syndrome. We never imply the possibility of women with Turner syndrome never like being infertile at all. It's more of like we cannot put out a definite statement that says all Turner syndrome, all women with Turner syndrome are infertile. That's not how science works, right? Science always presents the possibility of something being otherwise. So not all Turner syndrome women with Turner syndrome are infertile. Some of them can reproduce naturally. Some of them can reproduce through assisted reproductive technologies such as the IVF method, insemination method. A common method for men with Klinefelter syndrome was testicular extraction sperm ejaculation method, where men who could not ejaculate and produce sperm, their sperm was collected from their testes instead. So that's one of the assisted reproductive technologies. Insemination would mean insertion of sperm into a woman's vagina for further fertility. We'll not talk about that because we're here to talk about genetics, right? Talk about causes. Causes are very important. Most people are born with two sex chromosomes. Boys, they inherit the X chromosome from their mother's wife, from their fathers. Please, once again, viewer discretion advised. I do not intend on you like I am using this language for easier communication because this is the only language that seems to exist on the internet in order to convey a certain disease. Again, I do not believe in the binary code for sex and gender. So this is just for our easier understanding when I talk about this. But it's usually said that males have the XY chromosome, females have the XX chromosomes, but sometimes in the Turner syndrome, one copy of the X chromosome is missing, partially missing, or altered. Now we'll talk about the genetic alterations. Monosomy is the complete absence of the X chromosome generally occurs due to an error in the father's sperm or in the mother's egg. This results in every cell in the body having one X chromosome. I will dive into this properly. Basically, a composition for a woman's like chromosome, like the genetic composition is 46 comma XX, which means you have 46 chromosomes. Out of them, 2 chromosomes are XX, which determines the fact that you're a female, right? Sometimes one of those X chromosomes is missing. So we say in the scientific language, we write 46 comma XO, O indicating that there is no other chromosome except one. 45 comma X, sorry, not 46 comma X. That would indicate there are 46 chromosomes, but there are only 45 chromosomes because one of them is missing. Monosomy is when error occurs in father's sperm or mother's. I'll get into that later. Mosaicism, in some cases, an error occurs in cell division during early stages of fetal development. What does that mean? Um, we'll again get into that later. I'll get into it. Basically means that the fertilization occurs safely, but the mitosis or the cell division that occurs in order for the formation of a fetus to occur, when something in that goes wrong, it results in some cells having two complete copies of XX chromosomes and other cells just having one copy of the X chromosome. Let's talk about X chromosome abnormalities. We actually did talk about it. It's when it's basically monosomy and mosaicism. Right. X chromosome abnormalities is when error occurs in the female or in the male's spermatogenesis or the oogenesis. I'll get into that later, which I intend to. So it'll either cause one complete and one altered copy, or it will cause one complete and one missing copy or partially missing copy. It really depends. Coming to Y chromosome material, this in a small percentage of Turner syndrome cases, some cells have only one ability of the X chromosome, and other cells have one copy of the X and the Y chromosome material. These individuals develop biologically as female. The presence of Y chromosome material increases the risk of developing a type of cancer called gonadoblastoma. Coming to this, when you talk about mosaicism presents the possibility that your body's genetic composition will have 46 XX chromosomes and 45, X chromosome. Some of your cells will have the entire 46 composition, while other cells may have a 45 chromosome composition with only one X chromosome existing. In the case of Y chromosome, we're talking about how some of your cells will contain 46XY, and other cells will only contain one X chromosome. This will determine you biologically as female because you will develop into one, but it will increase your risks of developing different kinds of diseases. In this case, we're discussing a type of cancer called gonadoblastoma. Finally, not finally, second last fight, no, yeah. Diagnosis, fetuses can be diagnosed through prenatal counseling and through RT-PCR methods or karyotype analysis in which fetal chromosomes are examined. We all know the fact that RT-PCR is rapid testing polymerase chain reaction, or RT-PCR is used for detection of COVID. COVID cases, whether or not you wonder if you're positive or negative. RT-PCR is used for that. RT-PCR is also used for amplification of DNA. It's also used for detecting whether or not your future child may have Turner syndrome. Fetuses can be diagnosed through prenatal counseling. Prenatal counseling includes blood analysis through amniotic fluid, number one, and number two is your ultrasound that can also detect abnormalities. Let's keep in mind the fact that an ultrasound will only detect abnormalities in the heartbeat or in the effective formation of your body parts. If they can see a defect through the ultrasound, they will only look at symptoms. They cannot look at the chemical. They cannot look at the genetic composition a um, through an ultrasound, right? They can only look through it when they examine your blood or your DNA. You get your DNA either from cheek swab, blood. During pregnancy, amniotic fluid. It's pretty important. Um, Sometimes no in past diagnosis during teenage years is based on the fact that no sexual development occurs at puberty for women. This means that no breast development and menstruation occurs. Now we know that no breast development and menstruation can also indicate other diseases. However, these are prominent symptoms for a woman to be checked for whether or not she has the Turner syndrome or not. We'll talk about complications. I will not get into this as much, but I'm just going to talk about it from the um, like on the surface level. But please feel free to read however you like it. Turner syndrome can affect proper development of several body systems. We'll talk about heart problems. We're going to talk about a lot of infants with Turner syndrome are born with heart defects, slight abnormalities in the heart, mostly aorta or the blood vessel that branches off from the heart and delivers oxygen to the rest of the body. Your aorta gets affected really drastically. You have high blood pressure. You may be at the risk of developing hypothyroidism. I think that's in the next slide. Vision problems because you have weak muscle control of your eye movements. And hearing loss because your nerve cells do not function as proper as they're supposed to. Um, Again, it can cause frequent ear infections, which results in hearing loss. Um, Kidney problems, again, we talked about how infants can be detected for abnormal kidneys, right? You need kidneys for filtering out your urine. Therefore, if you have kidney problems, it increases the risk of high blood pressure and urinary tract infections because your kidneys are able to regulate the waste out of your system, out of your body. Skeletal problems, again, we talked about curvature of spine, scoliosis, we talked about We talked about how the amniotic fluid at the back of the child's neck, or disproportionate distribution of the amniotic fluid can really affect the child's development, causing for the spine curvature to uh, deviate from normal development. Your learning disabilities. They Women with Down syndrome have average intelligence. Sometimes they may uh, portray difficulties in social situations, and they might have ADHD. I'm talking about mental health issues. They might have an increased risk of ADHD. They might have problems that includes math, memory, and attention. Again, these are just some of the symptoms observed in women having Down syndrome. Not necessarily it means that you have Down syndrome if you face problems in one of the fields. Pregnancy complications are women. Yeah, we talked about this. Not all women are not all women with Turner syndrome are infertile. A large amount of them are, but a lot of them can produce through assisted reproductive technologies. However, they have to look out for complications during pregnancy, such as high blood pressure, aortic dissection, and it should be evaluated by a cardiologist before trying to get pregnant. Infertility is, again, small percentage of Turner syndrome women can naturally get pregnant and naturally conceive a baby. Autoimmune diseases. This is very important. Autoimmune diseases is when the antibodies in your immune system, attack your own body cells, thinking that they're foreign invaders. Your white blood cells um, will attack their own culture because they think of them as foreign invaders. This is very prominent in women with Turner syndrome. They might have Hashimoto's thyroiditis. They can have hypothyroidism. A lot of them have gluten intolerance, where they react really badly to gluten. They can have inflammatory bowel disease. Diseases does not necessarily mean that they're serious, but they should be considered. They should be approached to a doctor with careful consideration. I want to talk about the two different types of classic versus mosaic Turner syndrome. Okay, I'm sorry. One second. I'm just gonna talk about this for like 2 minutes and then I'm gonna leave. Yeah. Mosaic Turner syndrome is when only some of your cells in the fetal composition have an unusual combination of sex chromosomes. In classic, you have every cell in your body having only one X chromosome. Now, what causes mosaic Turner syndrome? It's when fertilization between sperm and eggs occurs really well. Your fertilization has occurred successfully, but in so this is meiosis, right? Meiosis is when you're sort of establishing the primary genetic composition of a future child. Fertilization is occurring between sperm and egg. They join together, right? So fertilization is successful. Meiosis is successful. Now comes mitosis, where a fetus is supposed to be formed. A fetus's body has to be formed, and it forms with mitosis because it has to produce similar cells, which will then form into cultures and tissues and body systems, and then eventually form an entire body. Going through the trimester period. Okay, what happens is in mosaic during my when cell division errors occur during mitosis, it will affect some parts of the fetus's body such that only some of the cells will be affected by this cause, but not all of these cells, because all of these cells are just their own composition and they're sort of dividing on their own, you know. So only some of the cells will be affected, which again increases your risks of having complications in your current body development. Sorry. Now, classic Turner syndrome is when error is occurring before fertilization is taking place. So there is something wrong with either the sperm or the egg. Your sperm, when it's dividing, okay, your sperm, you've got a mother cell, and it's dividing into like two daughter cells, right? Now, the mother cell has an XX or an XY chromosome, and it's supposed to put X in one daughter cell, and X in one daughter cell, or Y in one daughter cell, and X in one daughter cell. Here's the problem. Sometimes not an error called non-disjunction occurs. Non-disjunction is when both of those chromosomes are given to one daughter cell and no chromosomes are given to another daughter cell. So this presents two possibilities. Either the fetus will inherit both those chromosomes, either leading to Klinefelter syndrome or any other syndrome that occurs in females. Klinefelter syndrome occurs in males. Really depends, right? So either both chromosomes are fused with the egg and form a different syndrome, or no chromosomes, the daughter cell with no chromosomes fuses with the egg and it forms Turner syndrome. It's as simple as that. It doesn't have to necessarily only form Turner syndrome. This also occurs in oogenesis. So when your ovule is only containing is has like when your ovule has no chromosomes in it, or when your ovule has both X chromosomes in it, and then when it's fusing, it's sort of creating complications in the first place. It's creating complications in the meiosis, not in the mitosis. So the primary base for genetic composition that should be normal during fertilization, that's not happening. You're causing a defect in during fertilization in the first place. You're causing defect in the first place. That meiosis error is going to affect the mitosis that comes after it. Therefore, your entire fetus will inherit those complications because then multiplication of cells occur, right? All of them are going to inherit the same characteristics. And because mitosis means creating clones of the parent cell, all of the daughter cells are going to have the exact same effects, same as that of the mother cell. Now we'll talk about the genotype, which is the genetic composition. Genotype for Mosaic is very variable and can be 45, X, 46, XX, or even 46, XX, or even 45, X, 47, XXX, or 45, X slash 46, XY. This means that we're talking about Mosaic. So your first category is 45, X slash 46, XX. That's one genetic composition. 45, X, 47, XXX, another genetic composition. 45, X slash 46, XY, another genetic composition. So it's saying some of the cells will have 45, X, some of them will have 45, 46, XX. It really depends on what your genetic composition is. Genotype of classic Turner syndrome is just going to be 45, X, period. It is just going to be 45, X, all of the cells in your body. Coming to RT-PCR, which we discussed in Mosaic, because you cannot determine where the cells containing 45, X are located, it's very difficult to detect the Turner syndrome in the case of Mosaic Turner syndrome with RT-PCR, because you're not able to really sort of locate the cell which might contain the abnormal genetic composition, while in classic RT-PCR is just more easier. And just give me a second. I have mixed up the points. I'm just going to correct that. And then I'm just going to end this on a good note. Yes, coming back to correct the mistake. So in Mosaic, like I said, RT-PCR and other molecular techniques that do not always diagnose the Turner condition because the problem is only some of the cells. Classic RT-PCR and other molecular techniques will always diagnose the classic Turner condition. Karyotype analysis also is like uh, quite difficult for determining the Mosaic Turner syndrome, but with a maximized effort, it is easier to detect the Mosaic Turner syndrome with the help of course, professionals and specialists. So that is the end of my PPT. I hope you understood every word of what I just said. Good. Thank you for coming to my work, coming for today's workshop. I am Ma, and this was my PPT. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you all have a good day ahead of you. Thank you.